Home automation with Hubitat. Turns out I was never looking for this device. This device found me. I was looking for something that would do a simple logic-based thing inside my home, which was turn on the furnace fan when it got too hot upstairs and bring some of the cool air from down here up throughout the rest of the house. I thought this was going to be an easy thing, but it led me down a serious rabbit hole of different things that I needed to look at. I started looking at different home automations like Google Home, checked out Samsung SmartThings, which got me into WebCore a little bit, which ended up doing what I wanted it to for quite a while. But at that point in time, I found it wasn't quite enough for me. Oh, I think I forgot to mention if this, then that. Try that as well. So that's where I ended up with the Hubitat Elevation. And here's the cool thing about this thing. Once I had it installed, it does things that I didn't even know I wanted it to do. So this is kind of like a comprehensive review of this device, and you'll get a chance to see what things are good, what things are bad. And hopefully, if you're thinking about home automation, it's going to help you decide whether or not you want this thing for yourself. The first option, which I really like, huge selling feature for me, was the automations are not cloud-based. They run locally on the device. The device right now is sitting behind my desk on a pile there, and after I plugged it in, it's been reliable for the last whatever it's been since I've had it, a couple of months. Now, does that mean that you can't control this thing with a smartphone? No, it definitely does not. Any of the devices I want to control, they are still up on my smartphone, and the dashboard is present there as well, and I can select through anything I want. On any kind of power outages or loss of power or resetting the device, the automations, everything comes back on its own, and that's all fine and good. There is one downside to this thing that it does not come back with on its own, and that's if it's in the middle of an automation. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have a timer like my fish tank, where it comes on and 14.5 hours later it turns off. So if you lose the power in the middle of that and there's no backup to it, the start of that condition that starts it to run won't have a chance to finish executing, and therefore it's going to be toast. Mine is powered up on a battery backup. Power use of this device is extremely low. It's just a USB, so there's no real worry about decreasing your life of the rest of your system. One of the things that I like about it so far is this device has been extremely reliable for me, and I haven't had any serious issues with it at all. I plugged it in, I set up the automations, and once I've got the rules figured out that they're running, it just does what it's supposed to do. Now, the dashboard of this thing is a downside to this device. It does work, it does what it's supposed to do. But as far as 2022 and electronics and how beautiful a lot of the other things in the world look, I think this is definitely like a Windows 3.1 UI. The dashboard looks pretty crappy. The Hubitat is also compatible with Zigbee, Z-Wave, and Wi-Fi devices, and it also interfaces with a lot of stuff that I never thought or expected it would interface with. The home theater setup behind me, there's a Sharp TV, you got a Marantz receiver, a Rotel amp. All of those things I can actually, by putting in some custom device code, I can interface with them with my Hubitat as well. So that's pretty solid. Not all of the devices are going to be that customizable. Hubitat also supports logging, and that is great, and not the kind that you're cutting down trees and putting them in the back of the truck, but device logs or data logs that let you kind of take a look. If you're building a custom automation or a device has failed, the logging helps you kind of figure out what went wrong. Now, one of the things that I recently discovered about this device is modes, and this is pretty solid. Actually, let me back up a little, just 1 second there. This device also supports geofencing, but I've found that being very, hit and miss is terrible. It's useless. For me, it was totally useless. It was unreliable. I didn't like it at all. So this is where I learned, back to the modes, this device supports modes, and the modes on this device let you kind of set up a condition as to, or a status of your home. So for me, I've got 3 set up right now: home, sleep, and away. And what that does is now my furnace and anything I want controlled is based on the condition of that. So if I elaborate a little bit further, like geofencing, people will have their thermostat's controlled by geofencing. Now I tried this, but it wasn't super reliable. But I already had motion sensors, and you can see one, and you can see one back there throughout the home for different temperature sensors on my Ecobee. Well, I set up the modes so that anytime that there's occupancy on any of the sensors throughout the home, I can set the house to somebody's present, so I can set the comfort setting to whatever we want, or I can change devices based on that. Whereas if we just leave and go do something, or go on vacation or whatever, those devices don't have an occupancy, so it can go into like a cooler temperature, and things are controlled on that. Now there's the third one, is the sleep. Well, we always run a ceiling fan in our bedroom, and I've got that on a Wi-Fi switch. So what the Hubitat does is it actually looks for if that switch is on. If the switch is on the ceiling fan, I know somebody's trying to sleep. Well, if that's the case, we like it a little bit cooler, so it automatically sets the condition of sleep, and it adjusts the temperature and settings of the house accordingly. So the modes thing is really sweet, and I think as I get more comfortable with the modes, I will probably add another mode, and I will probably have other devices controlled on that as well. If you're thinking about geofencing, if you're on the fence about geofencing, modes, part idiot, right? If you're on the fence about geofencing, modes might be a good solution for you. Dad jokes for days. Alright, so the ease of setup is another thing that we probably should talk about. When you first get this device, it is highly customizable, and it's a bit of a pain in the butt to kind of get it set up, get your devices all attached to it, get your dashboard set up. Because it is so customizable, it means you're going to spend a little bit more time setting it up. However, that being said, once you kind of figure out how this device works and what it's asking you for, or what it needs to get going, it's pretty simple for me now to add a device. I actually find it very user-friendly, more friendly than the Samsung SmartThings, the WebCore, or any of the other previous automations that I touched on. Now the automations of the Hubitat are pretty sweet. You can set up an automation based on any kind of smart information from any other device that you already have connected. So what do I mean by that? Specific example. Let's say if I turn on my Marantz receiver, I can have the Hubitat looking for that actively, that if that power changes, maybe I want theater lighting, maybe I want these lights to dim, maybe I want the amplifier to turn on or the subwoofer to turn on, whatever the case is. Anytime you trigger something or cause something or change something, you can have the Hubitat change anything else that you want. That kind of simplifies some of the mundane tasks of life. The only downside with the rules is when you're initially setting up your rules, you got to be a little bit careful with the back button. If you're not, rules end up getting broken and they get a little funky. There's definitely some errors there with the code, I think, that still need to be sorted out, but it's still very doable, very editable. You just kind of got to be a little bit more careful. The back button on your browser or the back button on your mouse. Don't hit that when you're setting up a new rule, and life should be good. All right, there's my list of pros and cons. Now, who is this device for? This device is for anybody that runs any kind of timers throughout the home or has any kind of a smart thermostat that would like to kind of automate some of the simple tasks. My aquarium runs on timers. My plant room, there's all kinds of timers going on in there. I took all of these 110 volt timers that you plug into the wall and have to constantly reset the time if the power goes out, etc. I just got sick of resetting them and babysitting them. I replaced them with smart plugs, and you can just chuck these things in the wall, hook up your device to it, take and slap in a simple rule and walk away, and you can go brain dead. It's just gonna run after that. If you are thinking about picking up this device and getting a smart home setup, I would strongly urge you to go with the Zigbee or the Z-Waves plugs or switches. I've personally decided to go with the Zigbee just because of the availability, and they're a little bit more custom. They had a few more custom things that I was looking for. And it also ends up being a Zigbee mesh range extender. Essentially what it does is the device acts like a repeater and it increases the range of your device. I like the Zigbee more than the Wi-Fi switches, hands down. They use less than half of the amount of data to communicate with the Hubitat Elevation, which keeps the overhead really small. And reliability, I would say, is better. If you take one of the other switches, and prime example over Christmas, we had Christmas trees and Christmas lights set up, and I just took them off and didn't disconnect them from the hub. Well, the hub wasn't a big fan of that because it kept looking for that switch anytime that automation ran. So this ends up being more work to set them up initially because it wants the switch, the Wi-Fi switch, to be on a Wi-Fi that's a static. So you have to go into your router, you have to make it a static IP. Then you also have to install whatever software you need inside your Hubitat to interface with the switch. Then you can go ahead with the automation. Whereas a Zigbee plug, it's so dang easy, it's crazy. Even the Zigbee thermostat was less work to install than a standard Wi-Fi switch by far. You put the Hubitat Elevation into discovery mode for a Zigbee switch, plug the Zigbee switch in, done. Go chuck it wherever you want it, and it communicates directly through the Hubitat Elevation. And that's it. Like, there's no more steps. Set up a rule, do whatever you like with it. And I think as of right now, I think the pricing is very similar. So if you're setting it up and you're starting new, I would urge you to go with the Zigbee or Z-Wave. The Zigbee I can speak of specifically because that's what I'm currently using or switching to, and I really appreciate them. So from going to, I didn't even know I wanted to start into home automation, and now I've got these plugs all over the place and they do a lot of mundane tasks. I can't imagine going back to not having the home automation set up. So if you're kind of thinking about it, like home automation, who does this stuff? Try it out and you'll be a little surprised at maybe how quickly you get hooked.